Welcome to the Adventure Travel Show podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. I'm gearing up for a walking holiday. What's that, you say? Instead of visiting places via car, bus, or train, on a walking holiday, you're actually walking to discover an area's treasures. There are several benefits to a walking holiday, and note that this does not necessarily mean that you're backpacking, even though you can. The benefits include you get to see a place up close and personal. You're more likely to meet locals and other fellow travelers. For example, I met my friend Simon while walking the West Highland Way several years ago, and then last year saw him again when I was walking the Cotswold Way. And he actually picked me up from the airport to help me start my journey, and then came and walked the final day with me as well. So you get to meet lifelong friends often because you have time to actually get to know people on these walking holidays. You'll find a walking holiday is often cheaper because you are the transportation. With a walking holiday, you can plan your pace in advance. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later because that's something I've learned from now doing a couple of them, that the pace is really important in the enjoyment that you get of your holiday. Often with walking holidays in many parts of the world, you can hire a company that moves your luggage every day for you so you don't have to backpack. That's becoming increasingly important to me and my needs as I get older. And if you should use a tour company to plan your adventure for you and make all the arrangements, you would have an in-country contact in case something goes wrong or you run into some kind of a snafu. They've got somebody on the ground that knows what to do to help you handle your problem. The local tour company can also help you plan your itinerary based on the mileage that you want to do every day. So far, I've done 2 walking holidays in the UK. The West Highland Way in Scotland, that's where I met my friend Simon, and the Cotswold Way in England. Both of them are about 100 miles. And I enjoyed them so much that I'm now planning to do the El Camino de Santiago, but this time I'm not doing the way where you come in from France to the Pyrenees like most people do. I'm going to come up the Portuguese way because there's actually several different routes to get to Santiago. Today, I thought it might be helpful to give you a rundown on how I personally plan and execute my walking holidays. There's basically 8 steps. Number 1, obviously, you got to determine your destination. Where are you going to go? I've covered several long-distance hikes on the Active Travel Adventures podcast, so you can explore the directory there to get some ideas. And on the website for today's show, I've also listed some of the most popular long-distance hikes to give you some inspiration as well. And I'm going to include this list in the monthly newsletter, so be sure that you sign up for that as well. And note, I don't spam you. You'll get 1 email a month from me, usually sometime around the beginning of the month. And that's it. And it has whatever free downloads that I did for the month for this show and the Active Travel Adventures podcast. Another good source, if you're interested in the UK and you want to go someplace where they speak English, is to check out the Active Travel Adventures episode number 13 on the UK's best walking holidays. That'll give you some great ideas as well. So you've determined your destination. What's next? Now you got to figure out when you're going to go. So you got to plan the timing. Spring can often be wetter and has more changeable weather than the fall, but spring to me is still a good option, even though if I have my druthers, I tend to choose fall. It's important to check out the monthly averages for not only the average high and low temperatures, but what kind of precipitation do you get in the certain months that you're considering going. If you don't mind hiking in rain, doesn't make a difference, but if you do, you don't want to be going during the rainy season. You can get a broad idea of what the season is for that trail by checking tour company dates on their website. So they'll tell you like the months that they run the trip. So you know that you need to focus within those dates, even if you don't use them. Another really important thing that you're not going to see in the tour company's things, which you'll need to check out with forums or just poking around, is are there any serious bug issues that you need to contend with during certain times of the year? I'm thinking of the midges on the West Highland Way that come out in the summertime, so you want to kind of beat that. That's why I went late May, early June. Black flies in Maine, I believe that's June up there. So some places have pests that you want to make sure you're aware of those so you're not wearing bug nets unless you have to. So for your sanity, you want to avoid whatever these peak pest times are. So you figured out where you're going to go. You figured out when you're going to go. Now you need to figure out what is your pace going to be. You got to decide your pace. I tell people that I've got 13-mile feet because that's about how long I can go before they start screaming on me. Even though I've hiked 20 miles in a day with a full backpack on, my feet were not at all happy, and I arrived at camp utterly exhausted. And I learned on my last walking holiday on the Cotswold Way that if time permits, I want to reduce my daily mileage average so that I have enough energy at the end of the day to explore whatever village I land in that night. even if it means I don't have time to do the whole trail. I finally learned that it's the overall experience, not how many miles. I'm not clocking the miles anymore. It's not all about the distance. It's about the overall experience and enjoyment of my trip. So for my future walks, I want to walk maybe 8 to 12 miles a day instead of like the 16 or so that I've been doing. And note that sometimes on some trails, the towns may be so spread out that you may be forced to have some long days. So you need to be aware of that. And on the popular trails, you want to book your lodging well in advance to make sure that you do have the option of stopping at the better intervals instead of being stuck hiking an extra 10 miles because you didn't book soon enough in advance. I want to encourage you to minimize the super long mileage days. If you see an option that, you're going to have a short day of only 5 miles, but it saves you from having an 18-mile day, do it. If you can do the time and you can afford the extra hotel night, do it. Your feet will be very grateful. I noticed one thing. Whenever I go on the Appalachian Trail these days, I still like to do little section hikes when I can, get out there whenever I can. It seems that the kids, it's usually the young kids and the people that are retired that you'll see out there that are doing the through hiking, they're all bragging about how many miles they do in a day. And they're all trying to do like at least 30 a day. I'm like, what's the rush? It's become more about clocking the miles than it is about the actual experience of enjoying the hike. They can't possibly have any energy at the end of the day by doing that. So to me, I'm finally learning, enjoy the journey. It's not a trudge hike. We're not doing the Bataan Death March. We want to go out, enjoy exploring new areas, new countries by walking our way to the different villages on a beautiful trail. So we know where we're going. We know when we're going. We know what kind of pace we're going to do. Now you got to figure out how long can you go for. You got to determine the length of time that you can hike. And you got to allow for travel time to your destination. And particularly if there's a significant time difference, you may want to get there a couple of days early so you get your bearings and you're not starting off exhausted. So that means if you've got 7 days available to actually walk and you want to do an average of 10 miles a day, you're looking at walking about 70 miles. If you want to do the West Highland Way, that's 96 miles, you're either going to have to skip ahead or cut out some sections or either up your daily mileage to an average of 14 miles a day or figure out some way to get 3 more days off so that you can hike those extra 3 days. If you decide to cut out some sections, read itineraries online to see the best sections to delete. As much as most parts are pretty and nice, sometimes there's little areas, maybe you could have done without that. Now maybe that might be the day to take the bus to that town and skip that day altogether walking, if that means that you get to do the pace that you want to do. You're also going to need to figure out how easy it is to get from one place to another. Sometimes public transportation is not readily accessible in some of these more remote areas, or if it is, just because of the way the mountains are and the lack of roads in some of them, you might have to go a really long way to go around the mountain that you could walk right by the lake to get to in 10 miles. So you need to take a look at that. I like an app called Rome to Rio. It's free, and that'll give you some options it'll tell you what your options are, how long it's going to take, and what the approximate price is. So I love that app just to give me a ballpark idea of what I'm getting myself into. I used a self-guided tour company to plan my West Highland Way, and one thing they did that was really nice is every day they gave me options in case I couldn't, for whatever reason, whether I was hurt, sick, didn't feel like it, options to get to the next accommodations by public transportation. Sometimes it wasn't always available, and I'd have to take a cab, very expensive, but it let me know that, you can take a bus from here. And I actually used that one day when the weather was so awful, so cold, this biting, shooting rain it had to be below 40, but above freezing because it wasn't icy, but it felt icy, that I was just frozen stiff. And I had a 20-mile scheduled hike that day in this godforsaken barren land that if something went wrong, I would have been in serious trouble. So I was grateful to see that, if I make it to Bridge at Orkney, that was the easy 7 miles before I went over the big mountain, that I could take a bus. That was a really great decision on my part, and it was nice to have that in hand. So keep that in mind. If you need to alter the plans or shorten the days of your trip, it's nice to have that ahead of time, particularly if you're planning this yourself and don't have a company to do that for you. And speaking of company, you need to decide, are you going to plan this trip yourself or are you going to hire a self-guided tour company? Most walking holidays can be planned from the comfort of your home. However, you're going to be trading your time for money, and you may not know about some local issues. Again, I'm going to go back to the West Highland Way. In this one remote area, there was one lodging, King's House, that was available. And this was at the end of that 20-mile day. So if that was booked or unavailable, which it turns out it was closed for renovations, I would have had another 10 some odd miles to hike to the next town. Because I used a tour company that was aware of this problem, they had a shuttle pick me up at the end of the day, took me 10 miles away to this lovely little town, and then picked me up in the morning and took me back to the trailhead. So that's an advantage of using a tour company. Now, if I was planning that trip on my own, I could have figured it all out. It just would have been a lot more complicated and probably a lot clumsier. Not to mention more expensive. And I wouldn't have had somebody waiting for me when I got there instead of waiting around till whenever the bus came. So the benefits of a self-guided tour company includes not only knowing about local issues and problems, but they also know the best places to stay. And they know a good distance, a good hiking distance based on your pace. So they can plan the itinerary a little bit better because they know the lay of the land. Usually you can let them know whether you want a 3-star or 4-star accommodations, but remember that in some of these remote areas, you may not have any options or there may not be many options at all. You can tell your tour company how many days you want to hike. If there's a particularly nice town, you can tell them you'd like to take a rest day there, but that of course is planned in advance. And then they plan your itinerary, they book your lodging, and it's usually like a guest house type of room. It usually includes breakfast. They'll send you maps and often a guidebook, and they make arrangements to transfer your luggage. Yes, that's right. You don't have to carry your bags each day in most cases. All you're going to need is a day pack with your lunch, snacks, water, clothing layers, and an emergency kit. Most companies I've dealt with or investigated include transferring a single 20-kilogram bag each day. That's around 45 pounds. You shouldn't be carrying that much anyway. Up to 45 pounds. So if you're going to do something exotic afterwards or something like that, you'll have plenty of clothes and plenty of gear in order to do that. If you are self-planning, you can do a web search and find luggage transfer services for your hike if they're available. They're not available for all hikes, but if they are available, it's easy enough to find them online. On the free download for this episode, I'm going to include my favorite luggage transfer services and self-guided tour companies. And also, let's say you're a little bit uncomfortable doing this by yourself, even if somebody's planning it for you. Some companies offer a fully guided hike. So you could do it that way. Of course, it's going to be more expensive, but you know you're going to have company. Believe me, you're going to have company almost all these hikes anyway. It'll be different people at different times of the day and different days. But generally speaking, you're going to see people to talk to. But if you go with a fully guided company, you're going to have your other travel mates, your walk mates. You're going to have a guide, and often you'll get a support van. So if you don't feel like hiking a section, you have that option in some cases. So you've decided who's going to plan the trip, you or another company. You choose the company. Now it's time to actually book it. Let's commit. You're going to need, in addition to booking the sections of the walking holiday, of course, you got to get your transportation to the starting location and don't forget, from your ending location, because you're walking usually in a line, so you got to get back to either to your starting point or remember to fly out of the end point. You don't necessarily get a round trip unless you're getting transport by bus or train or something back to your beginning point. You got to remember to keep that in mind. Again, look at that Rome to Rio app. It works out great, gives you your options. I also recommend that you check out episode 7 for how to get cheap flights if you're going to be flying anywhere. You got to book whatever excess accommodations before and after your hike. Let's say you want to get adjusted before you start your hike. Get there a few days early, either to sightsee or to get your bearings and get your time schedule and your brain working right. Or you want to relax and celebrate at the end of the hike. At the Cotswold Way, it ends in Bath. How nice it would have been if I had time to spend a few days in Bath and actually enjoy the hot baths. Wouldn't that have been cool? Of course, you got to book the tour company, or if you're doing it yourself, you got to book your nightly accommodations while walking, and you got to book your luggage transfer service unless you're going to backpack and carry all your gear. If you're going to backpack with a tent, you got to make sure you're allowed to do it and make sure there's campsites at appropriate intervals for your hike. And very important, you got everything planned, but now you got to get your body in gear. You got to train for your trip. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of training for your adventure. It makes it so much more enjoyable if your body is conditioned for your trip. Think about it. Most of the time, you're not walking around 10 or more miles a day with as much as 20 pounds in your back. Your ankles are not used to twists that they might absorb when you catch them on a route as you're walking in the woods. I want you to listen to the Active Travel Adventures podcast episode on how to train, episode number 46. It's really important. It's so important. In fact, I think what I'll do is on the next episode of this show, I'm going to play that so you can hear it, because it really, really is a underrated but super important part of making sure that you have a great adventure. And lastly, you need to pack for your trip. I have learned to be a seriously light packer. Ask yourself, how many times have you come home from a trip only to find out that much of the clothes and the gizmos that you packed never even left your suitcase? This is definitely an area I can help you with. I just returned from a 3-month trip, which included 2 business conferences, a week-long rafting trip, city tours in 5 cities. Therefore, I needed some nice clothes to walk around in. I was also hiking in deserts, which means that I had to prep for both the heat and the cold with performance gear instead of city clothes. And I managed to do all this with just a carry-on. Yes, you heard that right. 3 different climates, 3 different environments, from rafting, I need water clothes, to hiking in the desert where I need performance gear, to trying to look at least a little bit decent in the city. And I managed to do that with a carry-on. I'm going to include my packing list with this month's newsletter as well, because packing light does make your life easier. Yeah, so you wear the same things over and over again. Washing in the sink is your friend if you bring the right kind of clothes. So if you follow these 8 steps to prepare and plan a walking holiday, you will embark on an epic walking holiday. But when you get back, there's one more 9th step. I want you to write me and tell me all about it, or tell us in the Active Travel Adventures Facebook group all about your adventure. I do hope that you'll consider a walking holiday for your next adventure. I'm sure, like me, you're going to find them very satisfying and try to squeeze one in at least once a year. Be sure to subscribe to this and the Active Travel Adventures podcast so you don't miss any episodes. I'm going to be posting about my Mideastern trips sometime in the early to late winter of 2020. And since I'll be walking the Portuguese Way in March, look for that episode to come out probably mid-summer. I'd say sometime mid-summer. I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.